With Florida State in the ACC batting it out in the courts and Florida State trying to escape that league, it has fans around the country talking about what will happen to that conference and where will the teams in that conference go if the conference implodes. And us Big 12 fans are looking at it going, what teams might our conference get from the ACC? Well, we're going to talk about two of those teams in this video, Georgia Tech and Syracuse, and we're going to talk about whether or not they would be a fit. So stick around, and we'll have that discussion right out of this word from our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing, only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you. What is up? Come on in, make yourself at home, and welcome into another edition of Koza Corner. Belly yourself up to the bar, and let me pour you out this shot of top-shelf college football content. On tap today at Koza Corner, we're once again talking conference realignment, potential Big 12 conference expansion, and what just might happen with the ACC teams if, by chance, that conference does implode. Again, we don't know that it's going to. They may hang on and survive this thing even if Florida State leaves. But if they don't, it's interesting to take a look at what teams the Big 12 might have a shot at. Now, in a previous video, I talked about Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, and Pitt. I will leave a link to that video at the end of this one. So if you haven't checked it out, feel free to do so. And before we get into this, I owe an apology to the fans of those four teams. I had your TV viewership numbers from 2023 wrong. They were way too low. I apologize for that. I'll touch on that later when we get to the TV viewership portion. But let's dig in to talking about Syracuse and Georgia Tech. When looking at expansion, there are 5 criteria that Brett Yormark look at. He looks at rivalries, geography, athletic performance, brand upside, and academics. Those are kind of the things he looks at. I think he's even mentioned it in interviews before. So we're going to see, does Georgia Tech and Syracuse fit all 5 of these, or at least most of these 5 conference expansion criteria? First, let's look at rivalries. Now, Georgia Tech doesn't have any rivalries in the Big 12. UCF's not a rivalry. Could they become one over time? They could, but right now they're not. So it would have to build over time. But with Syracuse, they actually do have a rivalry in the conference. And who is that? It's West Virginia. From their days back together in the Big East, they played for what they call the Schwartzwalder Trophy. Now, it's not as heated as West Virginia Pitt or West Virginia, Virginia Tech, or probably not even West Virginia and Maryland. But it is a rivalry nonetheless. And right now I'm going to show you a graphic from a website called NoRivalry.com. And we're going to take a look at just how good of a rivalry that really is. When you look at this rivalry, you will see when you're looking at Syracuse's rivals, their biggest rival is Boston College. No surprise there. Second biggest rival is actually Pitt. And the third is West Virginia. Now it scores 11.9. West Virginia fans don't consider Syracuse as big a rival as Syracuse fans do West Virginia. But nonetheless, if they were back in the same conference again, playing for a conference championship again, and playing every year, and had a trophy game, had a trophy they were playing for, it could become a heated rivalry, especially if they're in a conference where they're one of only 2 teams or a handful of teams in that part of the country. So I think there could be some heat brought by bringing Syracuse into this conference. Now, when I saw Pitt on here, it brought something else to mind. What if Pitt comes in along with Syracuse? You'd not only have the West Virginia-Syracuse rivalry, you'd also have the Pitt-Syracuse rivalry, plus the backyard brawl with West Virginia-Pitt, plus you'd have Cincinnati and Pitt. If you bring Louisville and Virginia Tech in, you get Cincinnati-Louisville, you get West Virginia-Virginia Tech. The battle for the Black Diamond Trophy. So you could have a lot of rivalry games if you brought Pitt, Virginia Tech, and Syracuse and Louisville into the Big 12. You'd have a lot of rivalry games built in with those 4 teams. Now, let's keep going. The next metric we're going to look at is geography. Now, with geography, obviously, on paper, Georgia Tech doesn't fit, right? But again, just like I mentioned with NC State in the last video, they would help fill a gap. Right now, you've got UCF all the way down here in Florida, and then you have West Virginia all the way up in Morgantown, West Virginia. Nobody in between. Georgia Tech puts you right in the Atlanta, Georgia market, get you a team in between Florida and West Virginia. And by the way, it also gets you into one of the largest TV markets in America, Atlanta, Georgia. Now, I know most people in Atlanta are Georgia Bulldogs fans, but there have got to be a lot of Georgia Tech fans in that city. And if you can bring Big 12 football and Big 12 sports into Atlanta, Georgia, I think it would be huge for the conference. Syracuse, obviously, it gives you another team in the northeastern part of the country, up there closer to West Virginia. Still a long haul from Morgantown to Syracuse, New York, but at least you're in the same geographic region of the country. And I think that matters. And Syracuse is still a lot closer than Salt Lake City. So it gets you another team in that part of the country. And again, it gets you into a new state and into a new market. It's not New York City, but at least it gets you into New York State and maybe brings you some of those New York City fans, especially as much as Brett Yormark wants the Big 12 in New York and in Madison Square Garden and to build a basketball brand. Syracuse helps do that. They're a great brand in basketball historically. So, again, I think both teams fit what you're wanting to do from a geography standpoint, especially Georgia Tech. I actually give Georgia Tech the edge in that one because of being in Atlanta. Now, when you look at athletic performance, the one thing I like to look at is the blue blood ranking. Now, when looking at the blue blood ranking, I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet I made here for you to look at. But when you look at the blue blood ranking here, surprisingly, Georgia Tech is 26th in the country. That shocked me. I did not expect that. They would by far be the highest. Well, I don't want to say by far because Colorado's number 30, but they would be the highest in the Big 12 were they to come in. Even though Georgia Tech has not had a lot of success on the football field recently, historically they have. So they'd be 26th. They are 26th nationally in the blue blood ranking according to Winsipedia.com. Syracuse would be 35th nationally in blue blood ranking. Wow, didn't see that coming either. But again, if you go back to the 90s, the 80s, Syracuse was a really good football program. They're not as good now. They're not terrible now. But it seems like ever since they left the Big East for the ACC, they've struggled. Now, the meeting in the Big 12, which is taking the middle of the conference, they're 50. So the middle of the Big 12 is 50. So both of these teams would actually exceed and be in the top half of the league. Actually, Georgia Tech would be number one in the league in blue blood ranking if they were to come in. So both of them are fit in that regard. Now, when you look at academics, and I know the Big 12 may not focus as much on academics as other leagues, but it does matter, especially to the university presidents. Both of these teams rank really high academically based on U.S. News and World Report. Georgia Tech would be 33, Syracuse 67. Georgia Tech would be by far the highest in the league, and I'm pretty sure Syracuse would be second in the league were they to come in. And as you see, they would be well above the median in the Big 12, which is 120th. Now let's look at brand upside. When you look at brand upside, there are a lot of ways you can measure it. You can measure the size of your fan base, the size of your, your student enrollment. How many students do you have that are future alumni that may be rooting for your team, that might be buying merch, that might be going to games, that might be watching on television? That matters. But the one thing that I thought I would use, just like I did in my last video, is TV viewership, because that kind of tells you right now, today, how many of your fans are watching games. I use a website called sportsnot.com to get this information, and it basically measures every game that's counted in Nielsen ratings. So it doesn't count ESPN Plus, and it doesn't count any of the conference networks. But any game that Nielsen measures is on this chart, okay? And here's where I owe an apology to team fans of Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, and Pitt. I had most of your teams. I had Louisville at just under 2 million viewers a week, I believe. And I had the other three teams all under 1 million. Well, that was not entirely accurate. They all exceed 1 million viewers. Now, Virginia Tech barely broke 1 million in 23 with 1.02 million on average, but it's a lot better than the 400,000 I had them at in my video. So I owe an apology to all the four of those schools, especially Virginia Tech. But all four of those schools would fit well from a TV viewership perspective in the Big 12. And so would Syracuse and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, surprisingly, averaged 1.83 million viewers in 2023, Now, the Georgia game, I'm sure, skews those numbers slightly, but they would still be well over 1 million even without that game. So they would still fit in the Big 12. Syracuse had 1.2 million viewers on average in 2023, slightly below the Big 12 median of 1.31, but would still have them above many Big 12 teams, especially the 3 teams who used to be Group of 5 schools, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati. Without those schools in the calculation, the Big 12 median would be 1.37 million viewers a week. With them in the calculation, because the only games they had that exceeded 1 million were against Texas and Oklahoma for the most part, it brings it down to 1.31 million. Now, so it does bring it down about 60,000 viewers a week. It brings that median down. So those 3 schools struggle to get TV viewership. So when you look at TV viewership, both of these teams fit into the conference. But when you look at where these 2 programs are trending, where their football programs are at today, I still think I will take Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, and NC State over these 2 programs for the simple fact that I do not think they're trending in the right direction. Would they be a fit in the Big 12? Absolutely. And they would be valuable ads. I don't think they would dilute the conference, but I don't think they would be as valuable as the 4 schools I did in the previous video. Now, speaking of the previous video, you can check it out right here. It's on the screen now. Have a top shelf day and Q Country Roads.